This is the 5-minute guide to the Puerto Rico class, a battleship from an alternate timeline of the Spanish Navy.
Right, well, hello everybody, and you might have noticed the old intro is there, and that's for a very good reason. This is a video that I should have done ages ago. My deepest apologies to Alfredo Sierra, who was the other winner of the 500, if you can believe it, 500 subs competition, who decided he wanted his ship to be made into a 5-minute guide, and provided all the necessary background and text descriptions for it. So, with a very belated apology, here comes that video. And yeah, other subscriber competitions, this is why I didn't do this again. So the alternate timeline in which the Puerto Rico class was developed is one where cooler heads prevailed and the Spanish-American War was prevented. This, therefore, meaning that the Spanish Navy was not smashed to matchwood and didn't need massive amounts of money to replace. Therefore, in the immediate aftermath of the España class being built, Spain wished to upgrade itself in terms of naval power and designed a battleship based on the British Queen Elizabeth class, with 4 ships commissioned, each being named after one of the Spanish colonies, such as Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Philippines, and Guam. Shortly after the completion of the class, Spain would enter World War I on the side of the Entente after a Spanish vessel was accidentally torpedoed by a U-boat, killing over 1,000 Spanish civilians. With a number of modern super dreadnoughts present in the Mediterranean Sea, the combined Spanish, British, Italian and French task force then went on a more active hunt against the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman warships. 2 of the class were stationed in the Pacific at the outbreak of the war, and instead joined in the efforts by the Japanese and British fleets to hunt down any remaining German ships in the area, as well as, of course, capture a few German colonies, because why not? Due to the much more aggressive pushes by the Allies in the Mediterranean, this led to the so-called Battle of the Adriatic, where the Austro-Hungarian navy took up a challenge by an apparently understrength Allied force to open battle. This was then revealed to be a trap, as additional heavy forces in the shape of British and Spanish battleships sailed in to tip the balance decisively in the Allies' favour, with a total of 2 pre-dreadnoughts, 2 dreadnought battleships, 4 armoured cruisers, and 3 destroyers sunk or heavily damaged and credited to the Spanish squadron's engagement. As a result of this, post-war, Spain would be granted a number of the German Pacific colonies, which set the Japanese a little bit on edge, as they had been expecting to gain most of them. Due to a much more stable government as a result of the events described previously, during the 1930s Spain did not suffer a civil war, and the ships were sent to Great Britain in order to be reconstructed, with modernizations carried out similar to those given to the Queen Elizabeth class. Much like the United States of America, Spain tried to stay neutral during the opening phases of World War II, but as a colonial power, and with a bit of a chip in their shoulder, the Japanese invaded Spanish colonies in the Pacific, thus forcing Spain to enter World War II on the side of the Allies. As Spanish Pacific colonies started to fall in rapid succession to the Japanese, and the Wehrmacht began to make inroads on the Spanish mainland, the ships were ordered to sail to the nearest Allied ports to cooperate with the respective Allied nations in furthering the war effort. Upon an inevitable but hard-fought victory by the Germans on European soil, a puppet Spanish government was set up and ordered its navy to return. However, as with the Greek navy, the Spanish navy refused to do so and would fight on. The Spanish ships that had found a home port in the UK would operate mostly with the British Mediterranean fleet and would support the Queen Elizabeth and Revenge class elements in the Mediterranean fleet in operations against the Italian navy, which found itself outnumbered by the combined British-Spanish force. This would eventually lead to the Spanish ships supporting Allied landings in Sicily and Italy, as well as further landings in Spain. The objective of this was to drive an Allied force up into southern France, which at this point had been taken over by the Germans, in order to distract the German forces based in that country from the inevitable Allied D-Day landings. During the landings, the Puerto Rico would use the powerful radio equipment fitted to it as a flagship for its three sister ships to broadcast the following message to the local Spanish population and any German defenders who cared to listen. Españoles, la hora de tu liberación ha llegado. Levántate y lucha. Which basically translates to, Spaniards, the hour of your liberation has arrived. Rise up and fight. This provided enough encouragement for the Spanish resistant and other elements of the Spanish armed forces who had begrudgingly accepted German control to indeed rise up and fight, and vastly simplified the Allied landings as the Germans were now caught between two fronts. The campaign in the Pacific did not go quite as well, as whilst the presence of two heavily armed battleships did help the combined ABDA task force withstand the Japanese assault a little bit better, both ships were heavily damaged by Japanese air attack and forced to fall back eventually. The lessons learned from this particular episode discouraged the British from sending the Prince of Wales and Repulse through without adequate air escort, and the four ships would eventually form a squadron that stayed in the Indian Ocean until later in the war, when advanced air cover was able to repel or break up Japanese air attacks. However, the age and lesser AA batteries of the ships did continue to tell, as both of them would be struck several times by kamikazes, and one of them would finish the war in the dockyards. By the 1950s, the ships were quite old and worn out due to service and placed in reserve, where they would deteriorate until the 1960s. Guam and Cuba would then be scrapped, whilst Puerto Rico and Philippines benefited from a brief upsurge in public interest, with Puerto Rico being installed as the ceremonial flagship of the Spanish Navy. The Philippines, meanwhile, was decommissioned and also due to be scrapped when public subscription resulted in it being retained as a museum ship, at least for a few years. This managed to tide it over long enough until EU subsidy funding was made available for it as an item of European historical national interest.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to tag your question with Q&A if you want to leave a question for the dry dock.